They didn't just invite me to the SEAL reunion to humiliate me. They prepared a public execution of my dignity. The moment I stepped into the hall, the lights went black. A spotlight snapped onto my face, and every screen lit up with a slow-motion video of me collapsing during Hell Week, the moment Briggs had pushed my head underwater until I blacked out. The crowd roared with laughter. I never knew they had already gathered to plan that brutal humiliation even before my invitation letter was delivered. Before I could complete that realization in my head, two of my former teammates grabbed my arms so hard my shoulders popped. They dragged me onto the stage like a prisoner, all in the name of making me roleplay my activities and encounters during Hell Week. Briggs walked out holding a collar. A black leather collar, with a rusted tag that read, "Failed Cadet." "Go on your knees," he whispered. I was confused about how the whole drama was going, so I refused. Suddenly, he kicked my legs out from under me. My face hit the steel floor. Blood burst from my nose. Cheers erupted. He strapped that collar around my neck while the others chanted, "Crawl, crawl, crawl." One of them shoved a camera into my face. And Briggs leaned in, his breath foul, his voice dripping poison. "Look at you now. No one is here to rescue you now. Crawl for us. Or we drag you through the mud outside like the dog you are." My palms trembled on the metal floor, rage boiling under humiliation so deep it burned. But then, everywhere started shaking, windows rattling, a very loud roar from the sky. The entire building vibrated as a shadow swallowed the reunion hall. Liquor bottles crashed on the floor. Some of the decorations fell. Men screamed and dove for cover, because descending right over the parade ground was an Apache no one would have ever thought would land at that moment. And in 3 seconds, everyone who humiliated me learned whose knees should actually be on the ground crawling. Before I tell you why these men hated me enough to plan this, please like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Your support keeps this channel alive. Let me take you back to where their hatred began. Because men don't plan something that vicious overnight. No. Their obsession with destroying me started years ago. The moment I stepped onto the SEAL training grounds, I was the only woman in my class. And they expected me to break. They wanted me to break. To prove a point. To protect their pride. To reassure themselves that the SEALs belonged only to them. But instead, I became their worst nightmare. On day 1, during the conditioning run, Briggs, who loved to brag about his unmatched endurance, collapsed in the sand, while I kept running. Long after the instructors told me to stop, the look he gave me that day wasn't admiration. It was fear. Fear that a woman was already outperforming him. During weapons qualification, I outshot the entire class. My bullet groupings were so tight. The instructor thought the target sheets were misprinted. The men didn't cheer. They whispered. They stared. And Briggs, he stared the longest. Jaw clenched. Eyes burning. Like every shot I fired punched another hole in his ego. Then came the endurance swim. A drill that had broken men twice my size. The water was freezing. The tide was brutal. The current unforgiving. But I didn't just finish it. I beat their time by 8 whole minutes. 8 minutes. 8 minutes of watching a woman pull ahead of them, while they choked, flailed, and sank behind me. Briggs never forgave me for that one. Not because I beat him, but because he realized he could never catch up. Hell Week made it worse. While they cried, vomited, and nearly quit, I pushed through with a calm they couldn't understand. When the instructors made us carry the boats overhead, Briggs' team fell behind again and again. And every time they failed, the instructors shouted one sentence that killed them inside. "Look at Steele. Even SHE is still standing. Even she." Those 2 words did more damage than any punishment drill. Because I wasn't just outperforming them. I was exposing them. And men like Briggs don't forgive humiliation. They bury it. They let it rot inside them. They let it grow into something ugly. Something violent. Something vindictive. Something that eventually led to the moment They put a collar around my neck and tried to make me crawl. They wanted revenge. Not for what I did wrong, but for everything I did right. And the deeper I rose, the deeper they sank. Their resentment became religion. Their envy became fuel. And their insecurity? It became a weapon they aimed at me. Every chance they got. But none of them. Not Briggs, not the teammates who dragged me. Not the men who mocked me through Hell Week. None of them knew one thing. While they were plotting my downfall, I was becoming something far beyond their reach. And soon, they would learn exactly why. That Apache came for me. If you really want to know why Briggs and the others hated me, why they needed me to crawl in front of them years later, you have to understand the moments that broke them. Because I didn't humiliate them on purpose. I humiliated them simply by existing in the same arena and refusing to shrink. It happened during a full-gear casualty carry exercise. The instructors dumped 2 sandbag-injured cadets on the ground, each weighing over 100 pounds. Most teams struggled to lift one. Briggs stepped up, hands shaking slightly, trying to hoist a single injured cadet over his shoulder. He barely got it off the ground. His knees buckled. He dropped it in front of everyone. Then I stepped forward. I didn't do it to show off. I didn't do it to prove anything. I did it because the instructors barked the order. And my body responded before my mind could catch up. I lifted both cadets, one over each shoulder, stood, walked, stabilized, for 30 full yards. The instructors were stunned. The trainees were silent. But Briggs, he wasn't stunned. He was destroyed. You could see it in his jaw, the way it locked like he was swallowing glass. To him, it wasn't just strength. It was betrayal. A woman wasn't supposed to be stronger. A woman wasn't supposed to make him look weak. That was the first crack in his pride. The breath hold challenge was infamous. A drill designed to weed out the timid. Half the class tapped out in under a minute. Briggs lasted 52 seconds. When my turn came, I submerged, and time dissolved. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3. My body burned. My lungs begged. But I stayed still, floating in silent defiance. When I finally emerged, 3 minutes and 20 seconds later, the instructors whispered to each other, as if they had seen a ghost rise from the water. But the face I will never forget was Briggs. Red, trembling, eyes not on me, but on the stopwatch, as if the numbers themselves had betrayed him. That was the second crack. Hell Week. 0400 hours. The coldest night of the year. Men ringing out left and right. Quitting with swollen lips, purple fingers, and broken spirits. We crawled through mud thick as cement, while instructors blasted freezing water at our backs. One by one, trainees stood up, walked to the bell, and quit. Briggs lasted longer than most, but eventually his body gave out. He stumbled away, shoulders slumped, eyes glassy from defeat. But me? I kept crawling, long after the mud turned to ice, and my arms felt like stone. At dawn, when the sun finally broke the horizon, I was the only trainee left still crawling. The instructors stared at me, like they were witnessing the impossible. That was the moment Briggs stopped seeing me as a rival, and started seeing me as a threat. Navigation? I never got lost. Tactics? I solved drills faster than the men could argue about them. Marksmanship? I didn't just qualify. I shattered records. Every test they used to prove a woman didn't belong, I passed effortlessly. Every metric they believed made them superior, I mastered faster. I didn't mean to expose them, but excellence is a spotlight, and it illuminated every flaw they tried to hide. They didn't feel challenged. They felt small, inferior, insecure, exposed, and worst of all, irrelevant. So they banded together, turned their fear into resentment, turned their resentment into hatred, turned their hatred into a plan. Because in their minds, I wasn't outperforming them. I was erasing them. And for that, they decided I had to be erased first. Briggs wasn't always the monster he became. He started as something much smaller. Something far more dangerous. A mediocre man in a place where mediocrity is fatal. A fragile ego wearing a uniform. A leader only because of time and service. Not talent, not grit, not brilliance. And the moment I arrived, a woman outperforming him in every category. His whole identity began to crack. Briggs built his reputation on one thing: the absence of anyone better. He was never the fastest. Never the strongest. Never the sharpest. But he had seniority and volume. The ability to shout louder than the men who feared ranking below him. But when I entered the program, my presence alone exposed him. Every time I excelled, his authority dimmed. Every instructor's praise for me felt like an attack on him. Every victory I earned deepened the wound in his pride. He didn't see my success as achievement. He saw it as insubordination against the social order he depended on. Briggs wasn't alone. Weak men never are. He had a circle. 3 cadets who orbited him like moons around a dying star. They weren't strong. They weren't skilled. They weren't leaders. But they desperately needed someone beneath them to avoid facing the truth. They weren't SEAL material. My existence shattered their hierarchy. A woman outperforming them meant they weren't just average. They were insufficient. And nothing terrifies insecure men more than a mirror that reflects their weakness. What started as irritation became resentment. What became resentment turned into humiliation. And humiliation fermented into obsession. I noticed it in the way Briggs stared at me during drills. Not with competition, not with respect, but with a hatred so cold. It felt like frostbite. I could feel his ego cracking. Every time my name rose above his on the roster. Every time I saved a teammate he couldn't lift. Every time I solved a tactical scenario while he was still flipping through the manual. He wasn't afraid I would fail. He was afraid I would succeed. Afraid I would outrank him. Afraid I would prove, beyond debate, that he had been standing on a pedestal made of sand. So he didn't train harder. He didn't improve. He plotted. For men like Briggs, the problem isn't losing to someone stronger. The problem is losing to someone they were taught should never outrun them. And if the hierarchy had to be protected, if their pride had to be saved, they believed one thing with absolute conviction. I had to go. Not dismissed. Not corrected. Eliminated. Because as long as I existed, their weakness existed too. Undeniable, exposed, undeniable. And weak men will burn the entire world down before allowing the truth about themselves to be seen. So they came to the only solution their shattered pride could accept. Destroy my career. Erase my record. Break my spirit. Bury my potential. In their minds, humiliation wasn't cruelty. It was justice. A balancing of scales they couldn't bear to see tilted. They didn't just want me out. They wanted me to remember exactly who they thought I should be. Beneath them. Behind them. Below their boots. And years later, that same delusion is exactly why they put a collar around my neck and tried to make me crawl. But what they didn't know then, and definitely didn't know at the reunion, was that destroying me only forged something stronger. Something they could never outrun, never outshoot, never outcommand. They didn't just sabotage me on the field. They didn't just want me gone. They wanted to break me, to make me doubt everything I had fought for, to make me question the one thing they could never touch, my ability. And that's how it started. A quiet, coordinated takedown that turned every victory into a weapon they could use against me. It began with small things. The kind of sabotage you don't notice at first, but which slowly eats away at your confidence. One morning, my boots didn't fit right. Laced too tightly, soles compromised. Then, during the long march, my pack felt heavier than usual. One of the straps snapped midway through the evolution, leaving me with an extra 50 pounds to carry, while the rest of the team moved forward without a second thought. but I didn't know who'd done it. I just kept going, knowing they were watching me fall behind, waiting for me to quit. When the instructors graded us after each evolution, I saw the marks on my sheet. I was getting perfect scores. But Briggs and his clique were already working behind the scenes, rewriting their notes, falsifying the reports that went back to the commanders. One by one, they inserted subtle changes. Too aggressive, uncooperative, unstable under pressure. They worked in the shadows, quietly undermining the real record of my performance, until the official evaluations were littered with lies. And those lies spread like wildfire. From training rooms to command briefings, my reputation became doubt, my abilities questioned. They weren't just targeting my performance on paper. They started to spread whispers about my conduct. At night, Briggs' clique would leave messages in the locker room, telling other cadets I was too aggressive for a woman, unfit to follow orders. They said I didn't respect authority, as if surviving longer than them was a crime. They told the instructors I was isolated, withdrawn, that I didn't fit in with the team. But none of it was true. They knew it. I knew it. But it didn't matter, because every lie made the real truth harder to see. But it wasn't until they decided to drown me, literally drown me, that they fully crossed the line. It happened during a training evolution, a test of endurance and mental strength. We were submerged in a freezing tank, holding our breath for as long as possible. We had to fight the urge to panic, to stay still while the pressure mounted. Briggs had always hated the underwater portion of the drills. And that day, when it was my turn, he was waiting. He stood over me, watching, as the instructors dunked me under, holding me in place as I kicked and struggled. I stayed down longer than anyone else. Longer than they expected. And that wasn't just skill. It was my body's ability to adapt, to fight the panic that they thought would overwhelm me. But Briggs wasn't watching just to measure my endurance. He was waiting for the moment when he could finally push me past the edge. And so, when the water became too much, he leaned in closer and shoved my head deeper. So deep I lost all sense of time. I felt my lungs collapse. And I thought for a moment that this would be the end. But it wasn't. When I finally surfaced, I was dazed, barely conscious. The instructors pulled me out. But Briggs didn't let it go. He stood over me as I gasped for air, his eyes gleaming, and whispered, "You're unstable. You can't handle the pressure. Not like us." The rest of the cadets watched in silence, but I saw the smirk on Briggs' face. He knew he'd broken me. At least, that's what he thought. And then it came. The official recommendation for my removal, filed by none other than Briggs himself. The recommendation? Psychological concerns. They claimed I was mentally unfit for SEAL training. They said I had uncontrolled emotional reactions, that I was unstable under stress. And they took the one moment they thought could destroy me, the incident in the water, and twisted it into an official narrative that made it seem like I was unqualified to be there. The reasoning wasn't about failure. It wasn't about skill. It was about revenge. Revenge for the humiliation my success caused them. But the truth? It was never about my abilities. It was about their need to see me fall, to see me broken, to see me erased from the very system they thought belonged only to them. They celebrated when I was dismissed. Briggs shook hands with the instructors. His clique laughed behind closed doors. The entire class treated it like a victory parade. Their victory. My death sentence. They thought my story ended on that training field. They thought stripping me of my SEAL future meant they had stripped me of purpose. They thought I would vanish quietly, the way they believed a woman should. They were wrong. Catastrophically wrong. Because removing me from their world didn't break me. It freed me. The day I walked off that base, I felt something they never did. Clarity. No more whispers. No more sabotage. No more men trying to smother my potential under their insecurity. For the first time, I wasn't fighting to prove myself to them. I was fighting to become the woman I knew I always was. And fate, or destiny, or maybe just poetic justice, placed the right door in front of me. A door Briggs could never break down. A door he didn't even know existed. A week after my dismissal, I received a cryptic email with a single line. Your skills qualify you for a different battlefield. It led me to a secure facility. A base so deep in the desert that maps refused to acknowledge it. That was when I learned. The military had been building a new program. A classified aviation initiative. Designed to train pilots for next-generation Apache operations. A program that didn't care about gender. Didn't care about politics. Didn't care about Briggs' lies. They cared about one thing. Performance. And performance was something I had in excess. Training was brutal. Not Hell Week brutal. More precise, more technical, more unforgiving. They pushed us to master. Zero visibility flying. Nocturnal strike maneuvers. High-risk rescue extraction. Multi-target engagement under extreme pressure. Silent approach flights. Rapid insertion support. And for the first time, I wasn't sabotaged. I wasn't underestimated. I wasn't tolerated. I was respected. Because results don't lie. Within months, I was outperforming pilots who had flown Apaches for years. I learned to dance with the machine, to feel every vibration, every shift in the rotor wash, every whisper of air beneath the wings. The instructors started calling me the ghost in the sky, not because I was quiet, but because enemy units never saw me coming, until it was far, far too late. While Briggs was still barking orders at trainees who barely respected him, I was executing specialized missions that required precision, down to the millisecond. While his clique was struggling just to qualify for basic leadership roles, I was flying classified operations for commanders who actually valued my mind. While they stagnated, I soared. I climbed ranks faster than any trainee from my original class. Faster than Briggs. Faster than the men who dragged me onto that reunion stage. I was becoming something they could never touch. Elite, untouchable, unstoppable. My file became classified. My missions became invisible. My accomplishments sealed behind top-level clearance. To the outside world. To Briggs, to his clique. To every man who called me a failure. I had disappeared. But in reality, I was evolving into the one thing their pride could never survive. A woman who didn't just rise above them, but rose far beyond their reach. Which is why, when that Apache descended over the reunion ground, when the earth shook and the windows rattled, they looked up in confusion, fear, denial, because not a single one of them had the slightest idea that I was the one waiting inside that cockpit. Years passed. Years in which Briggs and his clique stagnated in mediocrity. While I rose through levels of training and clearance, they couldn't even dream of accessing. But men like Briggs have long memories. Not for their failures, but for the people who witnessed their failures. Especially a woman. Every success I achieved back then felt like a personal attack on his masculinity. And even after I was gone, that humiliation didn't fade. It fermented, soured, thickened into something rancid inside him. And eventually, he wanted repayment. Instead of rising after I was removed, Briggs remained painfully average. The instructors no longer feared him. Trainees didn't idolize him. He lost every scrap of inflated importance he once clung to. And with that loss came obsession. Obsession with the one moment he believed he won. My dismissal. But that wasn't enough for him. Not nearly enough. He wanted a public victory. He wanted an audience for my suffering. He wanted to reassert dominance over a ghost who haunted his pride. So he devised a plan. A grand finale. A humiliation years in the making. It arrived in a perfectly folded envelope, stamped with the seal insignia. Elegant. Official. Deceptively respectful. Inside was a letter inviting me to the annual SEAL reunion. A chance to reconnect with former teammates. A celebration of shared sacrifice. A time for healing past divisions. I should have seen the lie immediately. But part of me wanted closure. Wanted to believe at least one thing about that place could be genuine. So I went. Not knowing I wasn't walking into a reunion. I was walking into a ritual. A ceremony designed to slaughter whatever dignity they believed I had left. Briggs wasn't content with a simple insult. No. He wanted something theatrical. Symbolic. Something that would remind everyone that he beat the woman who once outshined him. He wanted one final humiliation. One public scene to reclaim dominance. One moment to erase the shame of being outperformed by me. He wanted to force me to relive my blacked-out moment underwater. The moment he nearly drowned me. The moment he twisted into a narrative of psychological weakness. He wanted me broken in front of a crowd, so his pride could finally breathe. The decorations? Fake. The warm greetings? Fake. The smiles? All rehearsed. They had planned every detail. The screen playback of my collapse. The reenactment of Hell Week. The leather collar. The chanting. The shoving. The blood. The moment my knees would hit steel. The camera shoved in my face. The laughter loud enough to drown out my heartbeat. Briggs and his clique didn't want closure. They wanted content. They planned to film my humiliation. Edit it. Slow it down. Add captions. And spread it across social media. The female failure who thought she could be a SEAL. That was the title of the draft file Briggs had already prepared on his phone. This wasn't a reunion. It wasn't nostalgia. It wasn't reconciliation. It was a ritual of cruelty. A human sacrifice disguised as a celebration. They believed they had engineered the perfect trap. They believed I would walk in quietly and leave crawling. And for a moment, I did crawl. I bled. I suffered. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that while they plotted my downfall, I had risen far beyond their reach. And the thunder that shook their walls that night wasn't a coincidence. It was consequence. And now that you know the truth, the years of resentment, the sabotage, the obsession, you can finally understand what that night really was. Not random cruelty. Not drunken bullying. Not a reunion gone wrong. It was the climax of their hatred. The moment they had been craving. From the very day I outran, outshot, and outperformed them. And once I stepped through those doors, they executed their plan. With a precision they never had in training. Before I could breathe in the scent of that hall, two of Briggs' followers clamped their hands around my arms. Not like teammates. Not like brothers in arms, but like captors. Their grip was so tight I heard a crack in my shoulder. My boots scraped across the floor as they pulled me toward the stage, like a prisoner being dragged toward sentencing. The crowd didn't speak. They didn't blink. They watched, hungry. The reunion wasn't a gathering. It was an audience. The lights dimmed. A single harsh beam snapped onto my face, and the first hit landed before I could brace for impact. Not a punch. A shove so violent my forehead struck the metal edge of the stage. Warm blood dripped immediately down my lip. Gasps? Sympathy? No. Laughter. Deep, ugly, echoing laughter from men who once feared my endurance. And Briggs stepped forward, slowly, savoring every second, as if approaching prey that had finally been trapped. He held that collar the way an executioner holds the axe. A black leather band with a rusted tag. The tag I saw up close in my hook. The tag that read, "Failed Cadet." He didn't kneel to put it on me. No. He grabbed me by the hair, pulled my head back so sharply my vision blurred, and strapped it on with a click that echoed across the hall. A collar. Meant not just to humiliate me, but to erase me. And the men who once trailed behind me on runs cheered as if witnessing justice. Go on your knees, Briggs hissed. But now we see it in context. This wasn't him giving an order. This was him rewriting history, forcing the woman who once outperformed him into the position he always wished she belonged in. When I didn't obey, not out of pride, but out of shock, he didn't hesitate. He kicked the back of my leg so hard my knee slammed into steel. Another kick, another crash, until both knees were bruised purple, and I collapsed in front of him. This wasn't domination. It was revenge. They didn't want me to just crawl. They wanted me to perform my collapse from Hell Week. The collapse they lied about. The collapse they weaponized to destroy my future. Come on, Steel. Show us how you drowned. Let's see the big tough girl panic again. Their voices echoed like a stadium of vultures. Cameras circled me. Hands shoved me forward. Men chanted with sick delight. Crawl, crawl, crawl. And as I dragged myself across that stage, the metal tore into my palms. Blood streaked behind me. And the humiliation they starved for years was finally being fed. This wasn't a reenactment. It was a ritual. A reenactment of the moment they nearly killed me, now twisted into entertainment. Everywhere I looked, faces I once stood beside in freezing surf. Faces that once trembled during night drills. Faces that once saw me push through pain they couldn't endure. All of them were laughing. Not because I was weak, but because seeing me broken restored the illusion that they were strong. Briggs crouched in front of me, smiling the way predators never should, and whispered, "No one is here to save you this time. Not underwater. Not in training. Not tonight." His breath was rancid, but his words were worse. Reminders that this had nothing to do with brotherhood, nothing to do with toughness, nothing to do with discipline. It was vengeance, ego, insecurity sharpened into cruelty. And for a moment, just a moment, they believed they had finally won. They believed the crawling was real. They believed the collar meant I was beaten. They believed the past had finally caught up to me. They had no idea what was descending from the sky. They thought they had stripped me of everything. My dignity, my strength, my voice, my future. But while they were busy trying to drag me back into the past, I had already armed myself with the present. Because long before I walked through those reunion doors, I activated something they couldn't imagine I possessed. A coded emergency signal disguised as a simple bracelet on my wrist. A signal only one unit in the entire country could read. My unit. Inside that bracelet was a silent pulse beacon. Tiny. Unnoticeable. Undetectable by anyone except those with the highest clearance. So when Briggs kicked me to the ground, and I felt my knees smash into steel, when the collar bit into my neck, when their hands forced me forward, my thumb pressed twice against the underside of that bracelet. A signal launched into the sky. My Apache crew, already in the air on a night training flight, saw the alert instantly. Coordinates locked. Threat index rising. Pilot authorization confirmed. They didn't ask questions. They didn't request permission. They turned the aircraft toward me, with a single objective: get our commander out. As I crawled with blood running down my palms, the first vibration hit the windows. A soft tremor. Barely noticeable. Then the second came. Stronger, deeper. Like the heartbeat of something enormous waking up. The men around me stopped laughing. Someone looked toward the ceiling. Another stepped back. A drink toppled off a table as the floor shuddered. "What the hell is that noise?" one of them muttered. None of them were prepared. None of them were supposed to be. The roar hit like a physical force. A violent, bone-shaking thunder that swallowed every voice in the room. Windows rattled so hard cracks spiderwebbed across the glass. Light fixtures swung. Decorations ripped free. Liquor bottles slid off tables and shattered on the floor. And then, a black shadow engulfed the entire hall. The kind of shadow you only see on the battlefield. The kind of shadow you never forget. My Apache. The same machine they once told me I'd never have the discipline to even understand, let alone command. It descended over the parade ground, with the full authority of war behind it. The searchlight blasted through the night like a divine judgment. Men screamed. Chairs overturned. Briggs himself stumbled backward, eyes wide. The collar he forced around my neck suddenly looking like a chain he had placed on himself. The moment the Apache's rotors cut through the air, every man in that hall transformed. The bold became broken. The loud became silent. The cruel became terrified. They scrambled, tripping over chairs, slipping on spilled liquor, crawling under tables, colliding with each other, like panicked animals fleeing a wildfire. No one was laughing now. No one was filming. No one was chanting for me to crawl. Because the battlefield had changed, and now they were the ones beneath something they couldn't control. And I, still on my knees, still colored, still bleeding, placed my hands on the steel floor, and pushed myself upright slowly, deliberately, like a woman reborn. The collar didn't matter anymore. The blood didn't matter. The humiliation meant nothing now. My power returned the moment the Apache arrived, because they had no idea the truth, that I wasn't being saved by coincidence. I had called it. I had summoned the very beast they feared. The machine that carries warriors into war was answering to me. Briggs stared at me with horror, not because of what he'd done, but because he finally understood. The woman he tried to break had risen far above him. The woman he tried to silence now commanded one of the deadliest instruments in the military. And the woman he tried to make crawl was the only person in the room the Apache would kneel for. As the dust swirled and the rotor wash blasted through the open doors, I stepped forward, collar still around my neck, but with a posture that made it look like a crown. I commanded the very machine that terrifies them. And in that instant, every man in that hall finally understood whose knees truly belonged on the ground. The Apache didn't just arrive. It descended like judgment. And as its landing gear crushed into the parade ground outside, the balance of power flipped so violently, the entire hall seemed to tilt with it. For the first time all night, the men who tormented me were silent, frozen, breathing hard, eyes darting like prey cornered without escape. They wanted a performance? This was the real show. I stepped through the hall slowly, boots echoing against the trembling floor. The collar Briggs forced onto my neck was still locked in place. But now, it looked ridiculous. Not on me, on them. Every step I took was deliberate, measured, powerful. A march, not an escape. The men parted as I passed, like a tide retreating from a force too strong to resist. No one dared touch me this time. No one dared speak. The same crowd that demanded I crawl now backed away with fear in their eyes. The doors blew open as the Apache's rotor wash surged through the building, sending papers flying and banners ripping off the walls. Outside, the aircraft landed with the authority of a war god. Heavy, thunderous, commanding. The moment its engines settled, the side door slid open, and 3 soldiers stepped out. Full gear, night visors, badges shining under the floodlights. But what made the crowd swallow their breath wasn't the soldiers. It was what they were standing at attention for. Because as I stepped out into the night air, the lights from the Apache illuminated the insignia on my chest. The insignia reserved only for elite Apache tactical commanders. A rank higher than anything Briggs had ever touched. A rank he couldn't even test for. My name, the one he'd tried to stain and bury, was stitched boldly across my flight suit. In silver thread, the woman he tried to erase was now standing before him as someone he couldn't outrank, couldn't silence, couldn't touch. When the soldiers saw me, they didn't hesitate. They snapped to attention, shoulders squared, spine straight, right hands rising sharply in a salute. That cut the air clean. Not one soldier saluted Briggs. Not one looked at him for direction. All eyes were on me. Their commander, their pilot, their leader, The same failed cadet Briggs once shoved underwater was now being honored by the kind of warriors he could never command. Briggs stepped forward, stumbling as if the ground had betrayed him. He looked at the soldiers saluting me, then at the Apache behind them, then at the rank on my shoulder. His face drained of color. His lips trembled. And for the first time since I'd known him, his voice broke. No, that's not possible. His knees buckled. He reached for the wall but missed entirely, crumpling to the ground like a man who had just watched his entire identity shatter, because it had. Everything he believed. That I was weaker, less deserving, inferior, collapsed under the undeniable weight of reality. He didn't see me as a threat anymore. He saw me as the proof that he had been the failure all along. The rest of the hall stepped outside behind him, but no one spoke. No one laughed. No one jeered. The same people who'd recorded my humiliation now held their phones lowered, forgotten. The truth had hit them too hard. The truth that the woman they mocked had outranked them, outgrown them, outflown them, and returned with a machine that none of them had the clearance to even touch. Silence filled the air. Not fear, not awe, but the realization that everything they believed about me had been a lie. A lie Briggs built. A lie they followed. A lie I had just destroyed with my presence alone. I didn't speak. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't touch Briggs, even as he knelt at my feet, broken and shaking. I simply lifted my chin, walked past him, and approached my Apache. Because real revenge isn't about dragging someone down. It's about rising so high they can't stand to look at you. And as I climbed into the cockpit, collars still around my neck, the last thing Briggs saw was the woman he tried to destroy, ascending into a world he would never reach. The Apache didn't just silence them. It exposed them. Because once that aircraft touched down, and my crew saluted me in front of everyone, the one thing Briggs never prepared for finally happened. The truth became undeniable, and I was done staying silent. I didn't bring fists. I didn't bring anger. I brought proof. Cold, hard, documented, classified proof that Briggs thought he buried years ago. As the last echoes of the Apache's engine faded, I pulled a small data drive from my pocket, the same drive I'd protected since the day I was dismissed. Briggs' eyes widened. He knew exactly what it was. Inside that drive lived every falsified evaluation he submitted, every forged signature, every altered performance score, every complaint he fabricated. I had kept them all, because I knew one day justice would need receipts. But that wasn't the worst part. I stepped closer, close enough for Briggs to see the contempt in my eyes, and revealed the real evidence. High-definition footage, pulled from the training facility's forgotten archive, showing Briggs' hand, shoving my head underwater, long after I had completed the drill. The instructors yelling at him to stop. Him refusing. My body going limp. The moment he nearly drowned me, just to force a narrative that I was unstable. The footage played on every screen, in the same hall where he replayed my collapse for entertainment. Poetic symmetry. The crowd that once laughed now stared in horrified silence, as the truth exposed itself frame by frame. It wasn't weakness. It was attempted brutality. It was abuse. It was criminal. Next, I laid out the timeline of hell he orchestrated. Tampered equipment logs with his fingerprints. Anonymous accusations traced back to his personal account. Harassment emails hidden under new usernames. Witness statements from trainees who saw him sabotage my gear. Internal memos warning him to back off the female cadet. Each time I spoke, another piece of evidence jumped to life. Another lie dissolved. Another truth sharpened. The same men who dragged me across the floor now avoided my eyes. They were accomplices to a monster. They never truly understood. It didn't take long. My crew had already radioed command. The moment the situation escalated, within minutes, 2 black vehicles rolled onto the parade ground. Military Investigations Bureau. Full authority. Zero tolerance. The investigators stepped out in uniform. Calm, cold men whose job is to dismantle corruption. Piece by piece, bone by bone. They approached Briggs. He tried to speak. He tried to deny. He tried to explain. But investigators don't listen to excuses. They listen to evidence. And I had all of it. Within seconds, his wrists were yanked behind his back and locked in cuffs. Not gently, not respectfully, exactly the way he treated me, brutally. As they dragged Briggs toward the vehicle, the lead investigator read aloud the pending charges: abuse of authority, assault during training, evidence tampering, harassment of a subordinate, coercion, intentional sabotage of a military candidate, conduct unbecoming of an officer. He froze. Those weren't disciplinary slaps. Those were career-ending, rank-stripping, federal prosecution charges. His entire world collapsed. In front of the same people. He assembled to watch mine fall. The investigators didn't rush the process. They didn't hide it. They placed Briggs on full public display. Wrists cuffed. Head down. Face drained of color. Collar of his own uniform stained with sweat and disgrace. People recorded it. People whispered. People stared with the same hunger he once had for my humiliation. Except now, he wasn't the tormentor. He was the spectacle. He was the failure. The embarrassment. The disgrace. Everything he once tried to force onto me, now reflected back at him tenfold. His humiliation was no longer private. It wasn't whispered in hallways or written in reports. It was public, documented, witnessed. A perfect mirror of what they did to me. Only this time, justice chose its target wisely. Briggs' arrest wasn't the end of my story. It was merely the moment the world finally caught up to who I had already become. Because while they spent years celebrating the lie of my failure, I spent years forging myself into the one thing they feared most. A woman they could never control, never outrun, never break. The same men who forced my head underwater could never imagine what I rose into. An Apache pilot, not just trained, certified at a level most never touch. I flew missions where one wrong angle meant death. I executed maneuvers that demanded absolute precision. I operated machinery so complex, the cockpit alone could break a weaker mind. The sky became my domain. The Apache became my voice. And every time I felt the rotor wash shake the ground, I remembered the nights they tried to drown me. And I rose higher. I didn't stop at piloting. I became a tactical air commander, designing operations where the margin between success and catastrophe is measured in milliseconds. My commands determine extractions. My strategies determine survival. My precision determines victory. Men with Briggs qualifications aren't even allowed in the briefing rooms. I now lead. The battlefield that once mocked me now answers to me. Eventually, command made a decision that even I couldn't have predicted. They asked me to teach, not recruits, not ordinary pilots, elite units, the best of the best, operators with experience, scars, and reputations. That would intimidate most instructors. But not me. They don't salute my gender. They salute my skill, my discipline, my endurance, my tactical brilliance. I became the instructor Briggs pretended to be, the instructor he lied about being, the instructor they all told me I would never qualify to become. And now, those same units practice under the flight paths I design, the protocols I perfected, the maneuvers I mastered. My legacy is written in the skies. Briggs tried to erase me. The clique tried to drown me. The system tried to silence me. But the thing about excellence is simple. You can bury it. You can sabotage it. You can lie about it. But you can't kill it. Excellence isn't a title. It isn't a uniform. It isn't a rank. Excellence is what remains when the world tries its hardest to crush you, and you rise anyway. I didn't return to the SEAL reunion to prove them wrong. I returned to show them one truth. Their power ended the moment they tried to break me. Mine began the moment I refused to stay broken. Today, I am everything they swore I could never be. A commander, a tactician, a pilot, a mentor, a force. Not because the system allowed it. Not because someone opened a door for me. But because I blasted through every wall they ever built around me. I became what they feared most. Not a rival. Not an equal. But something far, far worse. For men built on insecurity. Unstoppable. Their careers stayed on the ground. Mine took to the sky. And from up there, their cruelty looks small. Their hatred looks hollow. Their humiliation looks meaningless. Because the girl they tried to drown came back as the woman who commands the storm. Some people don't hate your weakness. They hate your strength. And they will try to destroy you for it. But when you rise so high they have to look up, just to remember the last time they looked down on you. If this brutal story of humiliation and comeback touched you, please like this video, subscribe, and comment your country below. Someone out there needs to know. The same people who try to break you will one day tremble when you rise.